Well, people might remember that Asher's Baking Company in Northern Ireland is run by a Christian family, the MacArthurs. And a gay rights activist came into one of their stores and asked them to design a cake for a campaign event in support of same-sex marriage. And the message on the cake said, "Support gay marriage." And they thought long and hard about it, but concluded that in good conscience, they couldn't do that. They didn't want to be actively involved in helping to promote the cause of same-sex marriage when they, as Christians, believe as a matter of deep conscience that marriage is between a man and a woman, as the Bible teaches. What happened next was shocking to a lot of people, whether they agreed with the MacArthurs or not, which was that the taxpayer-funded Equality Commission for Northern Ireland helped the gay rights activists to bring a legal action against them. And what was even more surprising was that in the first instance, they lost. And then when they appealed, they lost as well. Now, we were helping them throughout this process, and we were able to help them take an appeal to the UK Supreme Court. And thankfully there, the Supreme Court ruled in favour of the MacArthur family and of Asher's Baking Company. And what they said was that everybody has a right to free speech. And the right to freedom of speech includes the right not to say things. It includes the right not to be forced to say things that you don't agree with. And that's a right that should be precious to everybody, because whether you are a Christian bakery that doesn't want to be forced to help promote same-sex marriage, or whether you are a gay man who runs a bakery and you don't want to be forced to help promote traditional marriage. It's quite wrong to compel people to get involved in campaigns that they deeply and sincerely disagree with. And thankfully, the Supreme Court agreed with that view, agreed with the submissions that we made, and very strongly underlined the importance of freedom of speech and came out against what's called compelled speech, which is what was at stake in this case.
And following that decision last year by the UK High Court, the unanimous decision, what was the reaction from the wider public and human rights groups?
It was very gratifying that when the Supreme Court ruled in favour of Asher's Baking Company, that there was widespread agreement with what they'd done, widespread support for it. A very interesting bellwether on this issue was Peter Tatchell, the gay rights activist. Now, when we first revealed the news that this family were being sued to try to compel them to produce this cake, initially Peter didn't agree with this. I debated him on television, and he was on the other side. But to his great credit, he thought long and hard and realised that as somebody who's very committed to freedom of speech, that he shouldn't be trying to compel the MacArthur family to express and promote a cause that they disagreed with. So he came out very firmly in favour of their freedom of speech. He didn't agree with their belief system, but he defended their freedom of speech. And that's what you found really on this case in general, was that most people, whether they were Christian or not, whether they believed in traditional marriage or not, most people thought that the UK Supreme Court ruling was the right ruling.
Why has a law firm launched an appeal with the European Court of Human Rights against the UK High Court's decision?
What this law firm is trying to say is that, for a start, to be clear, they're not suing the MacArthur family or Asher's Baking Company. So the legal action that they're trying to get off the ground in the European Court of Human Rights is against the United Kingdom government. And they can't seek to overturn the entire UK Supreme Court ruling. They're appealing on a very narrow point, which is to do with whether companies can have human rights. Now, it's a slightly technical point, but the gist of it was this, and the Supreme Court dealt with it. They said that the MacArthur's family run their closely held family business as a limited company. And if the limited company was forced to produce this same-sex marriage campaign cake, that the MacArthurs as individuals would lose their human rights. So they made no distinction, as it were, between the family and the limited company which they ran to operate their business. What this law firm is trying to say is, oh, well, companies can't have human rights. Well, the problem with that is, if that were true, then the BBC would not have an Article 10 right to freedom of expression. So I think it's a pretty big ask to try and persuade the European Court of Human Rights to say that people who operate through companies have no human rights. They lose their human rights as a result of operating through a company. And particularly in the MacArthur's case, where it's a small, closely held family company, there's a very strong argument that, there's no difference between them and the company. It's not a great big multinational with shareholders and where the actions of the company are, remote from the people who own and run it. It's a family business. So I think it's going to be very difficult for them to persuade the European Court of Human Rights even to overturn on that point. But, we'll have to wait and see. They have to pass an initial sort of filtering stage with the European Court of Human Rights, where it's called the admissibility stage. And even if they pass that stage, it's not guaranteed that there'll ever be a hearing on this. So I think we're several years away from a hearing, if at all.
And finally, what could be the wider implications if they do win this appeal?
Well, if they won the appeal, it would not overturn the core of the Supreme Court ruling in the Ashes Baking Company case. The principle that the UK Supreme Court is against compelled speech would remain. All it would mean is that people who run their businesses through a limited company could find that they as individuals have human rights, but when they use the limited company to operate their family business, that they could find they have fewer human rights as a result of that. So I don't think that would be a very welcome development in the law, but I think that would be the implication if, in the unlikely event that this appeal were to succeed in the European Court of Human Rights.
Well, we will continue to monitor this story, but for now, thank you very much for sharing. Simon Calvert from the Christian Institute, thank you for your time today.
Thank you.